Hey everyone, Happy New Year, Happy 2023. This is Peter Skoll from Music is a Journey, my first video of the year, and I'm going to take a look at albums that are turning 50 this year. These are mostly albums that I have in my collection. A few of them actually I don't have right now. I did at one point, and then there are some albums that I don't have, I might want to get, and some albums that I'm probably not going to get, but I think I should mention them anyway. Anyway, let's get started. Released January 13th, 1973, Deep Purple's Who Do We Think We Are, the final album released by the Mark II lineup. The album title was inspired by the comments from a lot of critics who said, Deep Purple, who do they think they are? And Ian Pace said, why don't we call the album Who Do We Think We Are? So they did. This was apparently a very strained album to make, Ian and Richie having tons of problems and showing up separately for recording sessions. As well, during the tour for this, Ian basically said to the management, he wrote a letter saying that I'm not happy with the way things are and I'm thinking of leaving. And what he hoped was that management would then intervene and do something. But they said, wow, Ian's leaving. Okay, Ian's out. We need a new singer. And then Richie said, well, then get rid of Roger as well. And so Roger Glover was also given the boot. But anyway, this album here, the opening track, Woman from Tokyo, was the single. A lot of other pretty decent songs on here too. Super Trooper, Smooth Dancer, Rat Bat Blue. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's my least favorite of the 4 Mark II albums from the early 70s. But yeah, it's alright. It's alright. There's a funny little story here about how when they were waiting for various members, Richie to show up, they were, goof around and kind of play a little bit. And some of these songs were actually included on here, like some of the kind of the first day jam instrumental is included. And apparently there was a song which they amusingly titled Smelly Body, but John Lord said he didn't want that to be included in case people got the wrong impression of the band. Right, Deep Purple, Who Do We Think We Are? So these are not going to be in any particular order. They're just in the order that I managed to scribble them down on paper. There are some blanks, and some of them is just because the CD is really difficult to get out. I'm not going to show it. Some of them are because I actually don't have the CD right now. Story behind that later on. And some of them, I'm not going to get those CDs, but I think they're significant albums worth mentioning anyway. So here we go. The second one released March 28th. This is Led Zeppelin's Houses of the Holy, their 5th album. Again, taking a step largely away from the kind of more harder rock sound that they did on the first 2 and a little bit on the 3rd and kind of on the 4th album. But this one here is probably, in a way, probably one of the more progressive type albums. Song remains the same. I never did particularly like the falsetto vocals, but the music is pretty darn slick, I think. Really fast-paced. The Rain song is very beautiful. Over the Hills and Far Away, very nice. It's got the acoustic guitar. It's got the rock guitar. Crunch, Dancing Days, Dear Maker, their kind of venture into reggae, I guess. No Quarter, I love that one, with the John Paul Jones, gentle piano solo and that, really kind of eerie atmosphere, and then that really smooth, cool, buzzing guitar riff, that's great. And then The Ocean, another kind of just fun song. This album has kind of like mixed feelings. Like some people think it's pretty darn good and other people not so great. I found that in later years I actually liked it more than I did back in the 80s when I first started listening to it. Anyway, Led Zeppelin's Houses of the Holy. Now the next album I wanted to mention is Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, released December 1st, 1973. I actually did have this on CD, but a while back I thought I would replace all my Black Sabbath CDs with the Digipack set, kind of, like the new edition they had with Digipack. And so I got rid of them all, and then I started to replace them one by one and stopped before I got Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Paranoid, so I don't have it. But anyway, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, of course the 5th album featuring the song Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, Spiral Architect featuring an orchestra, interesting move for the band there, and also a guest appearance by Rick Wakeman, because Yes were apparently nearby recording their next album, and which we'll talk about shortly. And Rick Wakeman found there were some long parts where he wasn't needed and he got rather bored, and so he left and went to see what Black Sabbath were doing and ended up doing a uncredited guest vocal. not vocals, sorry, uncredited guest keyboards on the album. Does Rick Wakeman sing? I don't think so. So anyway, yes, moving on then. Yes, Tales from Topographic Oceans, December 7th, 1973. Just, you know, about a week after the Black Sabbath one. And this here, it is a concept album, basically the concept being that there should just be 4 mega long tracks, one on each side for a double album. And the very first one here, the Revealing Science of God, I've always really liked that one. That is actually one of my favorite Yes songs and my second favorite Yes epic. I love some of the more rock out parts and the kind of very good 70s guitar sound. I love some of Chris Squire's bass, the way it lands in there with some good like buzzing punches and so on. And then also Rick Wakeman does, I think, my favorite Rick Wakeman keyboard solo that I've ever heard at the end, which is just this wild screaming keyboard solo. Like the keyboards just sound like he's torturing them. It's really freaking awesome. The other 3 tracks, I find, what is it here anyway? I can hardly see anymore. I don't remember what it's called. The Remembering. It's a slow build. I think it's almost like 10 minutes into the song before it does anything that makes me think like, ooh, wow, hey there, it's getting good now. Which is, you know, it's a long way to get in. And the other 2 also, I mean, they have their moments. One of them is more experimental, and I remember one of them has the part that actually says Relayer, which is the name of the next album, and it just has this really cool melody. It's overall definitely an interesting album, but for me it's one where it's like the first track is awesome, and the next track is halfway through awesome, and then the 3rd and 4th track have some things. Some people think this is really an incredible work, maybe their best, and other people say it could have been trimmed down. They didn't need to be that ambitious. And I remember reading when they were doing this live, they actually did it like a theater performance where when the show started, the doors closed and nobody got in, which peed off a lot of people who showed up just a little bit late. Anyway, Tales from Topographic Oceans, a Roger Dean artwork there. All right. So also, here we go. I think I switched the order around on my list. Genesis, Selling England by the Pound, the 3rd album now, featuring Phil Collins on drums and vocals and Steve Hackett on guitar. I think this is an excellent trilogy along with Nursery Crime and Foxtrot. Those 3 albums together, this one and those other 2, just make a great set. This, of course, has the magnificent Firth of Fifth with that beautiful piano bit at the beginning, as well as the nice like a flute solo, and it's just a cool song. Cinema Show, pretty neat. Dancing with the Moonlit Night, which is one of the big ones, and yeah, overall, I don't like it as much as the other 2, but it does have some really brilliant moments on here. And by the way, this is Genesis's highest rated album on Prog Archives. I'm trying to see, where did I write this here? Where did I write Genesis? Here we go. Selling England by the Pound, October 13th, 1973. It has 4.65 out of 5 on Prog Archives, with 4,518 ratings, which is the highest, the most number of ratings for any Genesis album as well, and the only Genesis album to go over 4,000, I think, for number of ratings. So there you go. Considered one of the band's best works. So next, one of those big classics from 1973, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Brain Salad Surgery, released November 19th. Whatever they'd been doing before, they'd done some brilliant works. They did Tarkus, you know, where the Tarkus sidelong epic piece was really great, and side 2 had some cool bits and so on. But I think it's this one here where they really kind of hit it off. And the Toccata one introduced the electronic drum set of Carl Palmer, one of the first electronic drum sets, but really that kind of early 70s electronic sound. Interesting. Still You Turn Me On, Benny the Bouncer, their one kind of humorous song, and then Carnival 9, Impression Part 1, First Impression Part 1 and Part 2, and Second Impression and Third Impression. Plus there's some bonus tracks on this one here, including a song called Brain Salad Surgery and When the Apple Blossoms Bloom. Anyway, this is, I think, my favorite of the Emerson, Lake and Palmer albums that I have. I'm not like a major huge fan of them. I do like a lot of what they do, and this album has the most on an album of what I like what they do. Does it make any sense? Okay. Oh, let's see here. So then, I gotta mention Jethro Tull here right now. Jethro Tull, A Passion Play. I don't have it, I've never heard it, but it's worth mentioning. It was their second album to be basically one entire song, although it is actually a story in different songs that are just strung together to make one full album that is just one track. Anyway, one track of multiple songs, basically. And apparently it's a person named Ronnie Pilgrim who is deceased, and it's his spiritual journey after death. It was the second Jethro Tull album to reach #1 in the US. Pretty amazing for an album that is just like one track. I'd also like to mention Uriah Heep, Sweet Freedom. That is their 6th album, and among Uriah Heep's first 6 albums, Sweet Freedom is often ranked in 6th place, so it's given pretty high ratings and praise. I did actually have it on CD some years back, but I really like the first 5 Uriah Heep albums. I really like what they were doing at that time, and for me, Sweet Freedom was cutting away on the progressive side, cutting away of the fantasy side, and I just felt it was more or less Uriah Heep becoming a hard rock band. I'm thinking maybe I should try to give that album another chance again, but I'm not sure, you know. But anyway, Sweet Freedom, Uriah Heep, and this one, Larks, Tongues in Aspic, King Crimson, let's see here, March 23rd, 1973. This is the 3rd incarnation of the band, featuring Jamie Muir on percussion, Bill Bruford, formerly of Yes, on drums, John Wetton now added on bass and vocals, and David Cross, violin and keys, and of course Robert Fripp. This is probably, along with Red, it's one of the favorite King Crimson albums. I like some of the tracks. I particularly like Larks, Tongues and Aspic, Part 1 and Part 2. And one thing that's interesting is that the intro to Larks, Picks in Aspic, Larks, Tongues in Aspic, is that it's over 3 minutes long, just building up into the song. And they said that was specifically because a lot of the popular songs of the day basically got into the song fairly soon, and so they intentionally made the listener go through this slow build leading up over 3 minutes long before the song finally got going. And that's a kind of interesting point, because these days they say the average listener wants to be caught up in the music fairly soon, and so modern pop songs tend to not have long introductions, introduce a hook very soon, and get to the chorus very quickly. And that's kind of interesting to note that they were noticing that kind of thing back in '73, and this was their response to it. Anyway, King Crimson, Larks, Tongues in Aspic. Next up we have Free, Heartbreaker, the 6th Free album and the last of them. What was his name? Andy Fraser was on bass, I think it was. He left, and Tetsu Yamaguchi, I think, was the name of the bass player they brought in. They got in a guy on keyboards, and Paul Kossoff was really into the drugs. He was not so reliable, so they brought in another guitarist, somebody Walden. Forgot it now. But anyway, and he actually played guitar on, I think, some of the tracks. I think it was on side 2, he played on 2 or 3 of the tracks, and Paul Kossoff actually played on more than what he was given credit for. And he was pretty sour about the whole thing too, you know, getting another guitarist to come in and play in the band that he'd been playing guitar in all this time. But, you know, the drug problem was there, and it ended up, you know, resulting in taking Paul's life. So sad ending to that. This was also the ending of Free, and a lot of trouble during the recording of this. Yeah, Heartbreaker indeed, right? But then after that, you know, Paul Rodgers went on and started up Bad Company. Right, Nazareth. Okay, so Nazareth in 1973 did 2 albums. They hooked up with Roger Glover of Deep Purple. I think he may not actually have been in Deep Purple anymore by this time, who produced their first album together. The 3rd album, the first one produced together with Roger Glover, Razmanaz, took the band back onto a hard rock track. Their 2nd album had gone off their hard rock roots and was very acoustic and country and bluegrass and folk and whatever. So he put them back onto the hard rock track again with things like songs like Razmanaz and Bad Bad Boy and Broken Down Angel, which is actually kind of more of a southern rock type song. But anyway, their second album, see, Razmanaz was in May, and then in October they came out with Loud and Proud. So as I understand it, Razmanaz, they were a bit kind of nervous being in the studio with Roger Glover. They you know, kind of a little bit anxious, you know, but for the second album together with Roger Glover, they were much more confident. And I think that kind of reflects in the Loud and Proud name of the album. But anyway, these two are often considered a kind of pair, where one is the kind of like the early version of Nazareth with Roger Glover, and this is the later, more mature version of Nazareth with Roger Glover, featuring This Flight Tonight, a cover of a Joni Mitchell song, and apparently that kind of chugging riff, that dunk 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 dunk, actually inspired Heart to write their riff for their song Barracuda a few years later. Okay, next up we have Budgie, Never Turn Your Back on a Friend from June 1973. Again, Roger Dean cover art here. This was Budgie's third album and also the last album with Ray Phillips on guitar. One of the big numbers off of this one here is Bread Fan, the opening track, which of course gained popularity later on in the 80s when Metallica covered it, and also was the inspiration for the Ningen Isu song, Hell's Mountain of Needles, Hari no Yama, which is one of their more popular older songs. You might know it. Also interesting, there's a song on here called, what's it called? In the Grip of the Tire Fitter's Hand, and a song by Autopsy on their second album Mental Funeral, the death metal band Autopsy, was called In the Grip of Winter, and apparently that title was inspired by this title here, In the Grip of the Tire Fitter's Hand. They also have the amusing title here, what was it? You're the Biggest Thing Since Powdered Milk. Some of Budgie's song titles are interesting. Anyway, a good, solid, hard-rocking album from 1973. Budgie, Never Turn Your Back on a Friend. We have, let's see, when was it now? February 11th. My birthday. February 11th, 1973, Tyranny and Mutation, Blue Oyster Cult's second album. There's a song on here called The Red and the Black. This was a re-recording, a faster version of a song off their debut album. I'm on the lamb, but I ain't no sheep. Anyway, this was a kind of more faster and, you know, rock-out version. Let's see what else was on here. OD'd on Life Itself, Hot Rails to Hell, Seven Screaming Dizzbusters. That's on the black side. And then they have the red side, Baby Ice Dog, which was actually, the lyrics were written by Patti Smith, Wings Wetted Down, Teen Archer, and Mistress of the Salmon Salt, Quick Lime Girl, which is actually one of my favorite older Blue Oyster Cult songs. I just love that. Da-dun, 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 da-dun. I love that. Anyway, great song and very, very good album. I like it. Tyranny of Mutation, Blue Oyster Cult. Let's see. Oh, yeah. And of course, we have the Aerosmith debut from January 5th. Holy smokes, I gotta get this video out soon. January 5th. Adrian Baker producing. Lot of frustration behind this album. Joe Perry in particular was really frustrated because he thought this is not how we sound. This is not how my guitar sounds. This is not how we sound as a band. And they were just apparently like really scared stiff in the studio, first time in the studio, and what are we going to do? And apparently even Steven Tyler changed his vocal style for this album, and it was only on the song Dream On where he actually really let himself be his natural self. Otherwise, he said he changed his voice to a kind of Kermit the Frog Muppet voice. I've actually always really liked this album. I like the rawness of it. I like the kind of, you know, beginnings of Aerosmith sound. I always think it's cool when a band's debut kind of sounds like they're starting out, and then later on they develop and mature and you know, grow into the sound that we come to know. But apparently a lot of it just had to do with the fact that they were newbies in the studio and they didn't know how to communicate to the producer what they wanted, because they didn't know how they were supposed to get what they wanted. But anyway, Aerosmith's debut album, lots of cool stuff on here, I think. Rolling Stones cover even with Walkin' the Dog, right? It's actually not a Rolling Stones cover, is it? But Rolling Stones did it on, I think, their debut album. So anyway, there we go. Aerosmith. Beginning of rock legends. Okay, I don't have it. Ted Nugent and the Amboy Dukes, Call of the Wild. It was the penultimate Amboy Dukes album, or Ted Nugent and Amboy Dukes. After that, there was going to be, what was the one after that? I forget the name now. Tooth and Claw. And then Ted Nugent would just move on to starting his own solo band called Ted Nugent. Not a huge Amboy Dukes fan, but they do have some songs throughout their career that I like. Their second album from '68 has some really cool songs on it, and I actually want to get this one here, Call of the Wild, and it is available as a dual album with Tooth and Fang, is it? Fang and Claw? I don't remember the last one. It is available as a double CD. I just haven't gotten it yet. But anyway, Ted Nugent and the Amboy Dukes. Another one that I used to have on cassette, which I really should get on CD, Montrose, self-titled album released October 17th. Ronnie Montrose, the debut, recording debut of Sammy Hagar. Wow, huh? So that is a really cool album. I think Iron Maiden covered Space Station number 5. Other cool songs in there like Bad Motor Scooter and Rock Candy. I do remember having it on cassette, and it's a pretty solid, hard rocking, intense album. And in fact, it said here that in 1989, Kerrang! Magazine voted it as the number 4 heavy metal album of all time. 1989, it's being called number 4 heavy metal album of all time. Wow. Okay, who do we got next? Oh, I gotta mention this. I do have it. It's in a box behind me, but it's in a box under some things with some stuff in front, and it's really hard to get it out. But it's Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, The Dark Side of the Moon. What an album. Let's see, what did I have for the notes here? It went 14 times platinum in the UK. It stayed 963 weeks on the Billboard top top 100, top 200. It is actually listed with the recording, let me see, National Recording Registry of the Library of Congress for its cultural significance. Wow, and what needs to be said about Dark Side of the Moon that you haven't heard yet? One thing I thought was interesting, I read about it in a book I have about Pink Floyd over there. They were interviewing different people associated with the band, like roadies and crew and so on, their opinions about death, and I think it's things like mental illness and so on. And apparently Paul McCartney was around, and they tried to interview him, but he was just kind of hamming it up and making funny answers. And Roger Waters, of course, didn't want that. He didn't want joke answers. He wanted really sincere, honest answers from people. So Paul McCartney was not included. Alan Parsons, engineer and very important person in the recording. He's the one who got Claire Torian to sing the vocals for Great Gig in the Sky. He also went out to a clock shop and just got all the clocks to go off and recorded all of them for the time thing there. Yeah, very, very important, big album in rock music. I have it in a box over there. Okay, moving down the list, Camel. I have some Camel albums. I do not have the debut, released February 28th. Apparently, as I've heard, it is quite a hard-rocking album. Does show the kind of jazz and caravan type influences, so it does have that progressive side that we're going to hear on the later albums, but it does also have a more intense, harder rocking sound. The second album, Mirage, I really love that one, so I think I really should check out this debut album of theirs. Maybe this year I will do so. Thin Lizzy. Okay, I have a couple of Thin Lizzy albums. This one here from 1973, September 21st, Vagabonds of the Western World, the last album to feature Eric Bell on guitar. Oh, it was him with Budgie, their third album, and the last one to feature Ray Phillips on guitar. Anyway, don't really know anything about it, but hey, it's Thin Lizzy. We're talking about hard rock and heavy rock and progressive rock from the 70s, so Thin Lizzy is worth mentioning. Hey, here we go. April Wine, Electric Jewels. April Wine's third album from 1970, third album released in 1973. Whole new lineup here. We started out with Miles Goodwin and the Hanneman brothers and the Hanneman cousin, and then the cousin left, and then the brothers left, and now we've got Miles Goodwin and Jim Clench, who was actually on for the previous album. We've got Gary Moffat and Jerry Mercer in here. And this is actually, I think, my favorite April Wine album. The opening track, Weeping Widow. Man, that guitar sound is awesome. In fact, there was even an article on the internet somewhere like, how did you guys get that guitar sound? It is just such an awesome hard rock guitar sound. But there are a lot of other cool tracks. Run Lady Run was kind of like the one single off of here. It's kind of a more of the April Wine ballad style, but there are some other ones. With the way the script is on here, I can't read it and I don't remember all the titles, but I just remember that there are about 5 tracks on here that I really love, and about 4 tracks on here that are really good, and one that is so-so. But anyway, April Wine, Electric Jewels. While we are talking about bands from Canada, why not throw in Thundermug as well with their second album, Orbit. Okay, this one, the first album, Thundermug Strikes, was more focused on just a good solid hard rock album. This album branches out here more. It does a little bit more experimental stuff. The title track, Orbit, is just really cool. I just love that one. Very catchy chorus. It's got one of those like wild off the rails guitar solos where just the rest of the band are just out and the guitar is just going away with dive bombs and shredding and all this. And it finishes that way as well. I love that song. And then there's one on here called Bad Guy, which is just really really heavy, hard-hitting song. Even the bass gets featured really bad, just low, buzzing, heavy bass in one part of the song there. So, Bad Guy, just awesome. Joe DeAngelis has a great set of vocals on here. Yeah, but again, it's a mixed album. There's, aside from the hard rock and heavy rock, there's a lot of other stuff on here too, and I can't say I've really listened to the rest of the songs all that much. That's it, Thundermug Orbit. Interesting point, Thundermug's debut album in the US was a compilation of songs from Orbit and Strikes. Another band, I don't have the album, but A Foot in Cold Water. I have their first and third album. The second album, A Second Foot in Cold Water, was released in 1973, featuring the song Isn't Love Unkind in My Life, and another one, Love Is Coming. Alright, sounds like a lot of love themes. Isn't Love Unkind in My Life is a kind of ballady type, similar to their Make Me Do Anything You Want one. But the album also does feature a couple of good, like, heavy rock tracks as well. I've listened to the album on YouTube. I honestly like the debut album a bit better. It's more of a solid hard rock, heavy rock affair. But the second album still has some pretty strong tracks on it. Okay, A Foot in Cold Water. Who are we off to next here? Coming down the list, let me just quickly scan to make sure I didn't miss anything. Pink Floyd, Genesis, Camel, Thin Lizzy, April Wine, okay. Alright, coming down the list, an album I have, Eloy, their second album, Inside. Their first album was kind of more of just a hard rock affair. Early 70s hard rock, heavy rock type thing. But the second album shows them really changing their style and starting to be more into the progressive nature. The first song is 17 minutes and 14 seconds. Here it's a 17 minute 20 seconds. Land of Nobody, which took up all of side 1, and side 2 was 3 tracks. And there's also a bonus track on here as well. Inside, Future City, Up and Down, 2 bonus tracks with Daybreak and On the Road. So, I really liked the next album and some of the albums after that. I had high hopes for this one here. It's not as gripping as the next album after this, which I think is called Floating, but still, maybe I have to listen to it again. Anyway, Eloy's second album, Inside, their move into progressive rock. And that's a German band, now an English band operating out of Germany. We have Nectar with Sounds Like This and Remember the Future. I don't have any release dates for them, but 2 albums released in 1973. Nectar sounds like this is more of a hard rock, blues-based rock, jam rock type of album with, you know, lots of guitar solos and keyboards and maybe some good catchy choruses. Remember the Future is more of a concept album where basically side one, all the songs are segue into one another to make one track, and side two, same thing. So it is actually a bunch of different songs, but they are all put together as parts of a single track. And actually this might be, along with A Tab in the Ocean, they are my favorite of the early Nectar albums, the only ones that I know. I think I have the first 5 albums. But yeah, there you have it, Nectar. 2 albums in 1973, just like Nazareth. Another artist who released 2 albums in 73, Alice Cooper, with Billion Dollar Babies. I think it was their 6th album, and the album that really put the Alice Cooper band on the map. I mean, they said that, you know, 2 years before, you know, they were nobodies, and suddenly now people were throwing money after them. And the title Billion Dollar Babies was basically talking about the band members. And of course the famous, probably one of Alice Cooper's most famous albums as the Alice Cooper Group before he later on went solo. And they also did one called Muscle of Love in 1973. So 2 Alice Cooper albums in 73. As well, David Bowie releasing Aladdin Sane and Pinups in 1973. Pinups being covers, wasn't it? A cover album. Okay, I said Nectar. Hey, got a couple more here to go over. Queen debuting in 1973 in spite of having been around since 1970, and in fact they actually recorded some demos in 1971 which were supposed to be for the debut album originally, and they were asked to rework the demos, but they were really proud of the demos. And you know, in the movie, the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, it makes it look like they were just having lots of fun and everything just worked out really well for them. But according to what I read, like the making of this album here, there was a lot of frustration, things where the disagreements between the producer and certain members of the band, how things should sound and how the way things should be done. But this is a really interesting album in the Queen catalog because it is basically a heavy rock, slightly progressive rock affair. And that basically, the progressive side would be expanded on the next album, the Queen 2 album. But this one here really stands out in their catalog. It is pretty much a very hard, heavy, intense album. You've probably heard Keep Yourself Alive, but some of the other ones like Great King Rat, Liar, Jesus, yeah. If you see the video of Queen, I think it's Live at the Rainbow 1974, they're playing material basically from the first 2 albums, possibly from the 3rd album. And Queen are really heavy at that time, you know. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, so that's Queen's debut from, when was it again here? July 13th, 1973. And also from 1973, Styx with Styx 2. The album that didn't really go anywhere and featured the song Lady, which was going to be their first top 10 hit, but not for another couple of years. It wasn't until their 4th album, when they were trying to get their 4th album promoted, that a radio station said, well, you know what, we really like that song Lady from your 2nd album, so we're going to play that one instead. But anyway, that is the song that basically launched their career, got them off the Wooden Nickel label and onto A&M Records for their 5th album, Equinox, later on down the road. But here it is, Styx, the 2nd album. There are a couple of songs on here that I really like, but I haven't listened to it for a long time now. I think it's A Day. John Serluski, 8 minutes and 19 seconds, a kind of long, kind of spacey, psychedelic type track. Lots of cool, spacey keyboard effects and so on. I really like that one. That might be one of my favorites off of here. But anyway, yeah, Styx 2. And we also saw some of the Italian bands, which I have, but I don't have those particular albums. I do have Lorm, Orme, Felona e Serona, which actually is a really cool album. It is basically organ-based drums with a little bit of guitar, mostly acoustic guitar, but a concept album about two planets, one light, one dark, and festive and suffering, and then they basically kind of like swap roles by the end of the album. But a really cool Italian progressive rock album, actually out of the old 70s Italian progressive rock albums that I have, about 4 or 5, this is my favorite. We also had, let's see here, Banco del Mutuo Soccorso with Io sono nato libero. I don't have it. I'm not sure what it sounds like, but I thought I'd mention it. And also Premiata Fornero Marconi with their first English language album, Photos of Ghosts, which I think it was Pete Seinfeld who did the helped with the English lyrics, but I don't have that one either. And I think that's basically all that I have to say about albums from 1973. Of course, there's lots of other stuff out there. You probably know some that I haven't mentioned, and there's probably some that I probably should have mentioned and forgot. And as I said, I probably have some in my collection which I could have mentioned, but I didn't. You know, sometimes you take out the CD and you look and what's the date, and you can't see any date except it says 2006 or something like that. But anyway, there you go. Albums from 1973, turning 50 years old this year. I am not going to do an 83 video because I already did a heavy metal albums of 1983 a couple of years ago. Maybe I'll put that somewhere in here so you can look at that if you want. And I'm not going to do a 1993 or 2003 video either, so let's just live with this one here, 1973, and I'll be back in a bit with another video later on. Okay, thank you all for watching. Once again, have a really great 2023. Let's look forward to lots of exciting music. Okay, everyone, take care. Bye.